Hello, I'm Tom Brassington, a PhD student in the Department of English Literature and Creative Writing at Lancaster University. In this workshop, I'll be going through one of the historical contexts which is relevant to the strange case of Dr. Jekyll and Mr. Hyde. This concerns some prominent ideas circulating in the popular science of the 19th century. First, I will describe the process of how to identify relevant contextual information as well. So, when establishing contextual information to help us understand more about a given text, it is important to have a clear idea of where and how to look for relevant information. And this is relatively easy to do, actually. It often comes from the text itself. For example, you might pick up on how Hyde is frequently described in ugly terms, and then wonder what those terms meant to a Victorian reader compared to with you as a contemporary reader. Another way to establish relevant contextual information would be to look at the date of publication of a text. We know that Jekyll and Hyde was published in 1886, a year that was part of the Victorian fin de siècle. Knowing about the year a book was published will help determine what people were thinking and talking about, and thus what their references might be when they encounter a fictional work. So the ideas of the 1880s would have been different from the ideas of the 1810s. It sounds quite obvious, but sometimes people can use either outdated ideas or ideas from after a book's publication or the immediate years of publication to incorrectly read a text. For example, one of the principal notions permeating Victorian popular culture during this fin de siècle period was a sense that an era was ending. There was a general sense of unease that people's ways of lives was about to end in some way. And you could take that context and then begin to maybe look at it through Jekyll and Hyde. How does it signify the change or the sense of an era ending? Context can be established from the text by researching what certain textual recurrences meant at that historical moment, at looking at the period of time immediately around a text publication, but it can also be established by looking at the author's biography and getting a sense of what influenced them specifically. For example, from Stevensons' biography, we can learn that he was a celebrated author at the time, so we know his work was popular. We can also easily find out his social and educational background, which was comfortably middle class, and then learn what this meant at the end of the 19th century. So learn what it meant to be middle class in 19th century Victorian England. Looking a little more, I discovered that he had conservative political leanings later in life, which may influence the text depending on the age Stevenson was when he penned it. And finally, we can learn that he was a direct beneficiary of the British colonial project and so would likely have subscribed to a lot of British imperial thought. So there's multiple ways to contextualize what's going on in a text by doing quite simple pieces of research, such as looking at the decade or so a book was published in, or the biography of the author, or looking up recurrent themes in and then Googling the historical context of those themes. These contexts are useful to us because they can help illuminate aspects of a text. Now, the reading public of the late 19th century were predominantly middle class, just like Stevenson, so we can fairly assume that Stevenson was writing to an audience of his peers. From this, it becomes arguable that he and his audience would have shared a lot of similar views and opinions. Taking this idea back to what I found interesting about the text leads me to wonder what that audience would think and know about scientific theories of the time. After all, Jekyll and Hyde is written as a report on someone's scientific experiment, So it makes sense that the popular science of the time would influence how this novel was written and how it was received. So then the question becomes, what scientific discourses were prominent and informed the thinking and culture of the period? And how does this relate to Hyde's physical appearance, since one of the results of this experiment is the fantastically ugly Mr. Hyde? I'm going to start with the Enlightenment period in this workshop, though I'd just like to quickly say that this is not where I would start if I were researching the science of the time, but it would be probably the earliest and broadest contextual bracket I'd end up with, so it's worth noting something about first before we go into details. So this is the big frame around which smaller frames and more detailed researching becomes helpful. The Enlightenment refers to a period of dramatic change in Europe across the 17th to 19th centuries. It is characterized by changes in the social order from a feudal model to a capitalist model, this resulting from the emergence of a merchant social class who gained huge amounts of power as a result of various revolutions, the largest being the French Revolution. This period also saw rapid scientific development and the advent of rationalist and empiricist philosophy. The scientific method we use today was in its infancy during the Enlightenment. Finally, this period was also marked by the establishment and rapid expansion of the European colonial projects, with Britain being one of the largest and most devastating to indigenous peoples. So the Enlightenment provides this broad frame for some of the details we'll get into, specifically to do with sciences of the 1880s. These massive social and cultural changes percolated down into many aspects of life, including popular scientific thought at the time. Popular science refers specifically to how scientific research is taken up and understood by the masses and popular cultural institutions like newspapers and the press. One such prominent popular theory was degeneration, which accrued its popularity between the publication of Charles Darwin's On the Origin of the Species in 1859 and the discovery of DNA in the 1940s and 50s. In brief, degeneration theory is the antithesis to evolutionary theory, where evolutionary theory comprises the articulation of biological change over time in response to natural and sexual selection. Degeneration theory proposes that the opposite is also possible, that things can go backwards and devolve. This relies on a popular misconception of evolution as a linear progress, where every evolved trait presents an ascent of a species into something better and superior. In assuming this linearity with evolution, the possibility of backward reversions emerge. It's just important to quickly say as well that evolution is not a linear process. Degeneration was dismissed by Darwin at the time, but its simplicity provided a powerfully persuasive idea for scientific racists to deploy, and was something that percolated throughout the educated middle classes. People were really attached to degeneration theory for its its ability to incite mass panic and worry. And scientific racists, just to quickly define a term, refers to those who use scientific methods to justify racist politics and beliefs. And degeneration is a product of imperialism and the racism that fueled that, as much as it is a product of people assuming it's an antithesis to evolutionary thinking, and I'll get into that in the next few slides. So, atavism, a specific component of degeneration theory, which argues that degeneration is a visible and observable thing, A degenerated individual has physical traits that visibly show them to be a throwback. In 21st century evolutionary thinking, evolution is seen as a form of change as a result of natural and sexual selection in which the evolutionary trait is a development that makes a species better adapted to the current environment it inhabits. Atavism posits that changes are observable almost immediately. In 19th century evolutionary thinking, evolution is a strictly progressive concept where future generations should be better than preceding ones, a philosophy known as positivism. To have a throwback indicates errors and signals a regression in a species' development in this understanding of evolution. Rather conveniently, atavistic traits in humans in this school of thought included things like darker skin and larger facial features. Conversely, light skin and features generally associated with white Europeans were regarded as advanced traits. Scientific racists use this to consistently posit white Europeans as the superior human race, thereby justifying practices like racism, slavery, and so on. One of the ways that degeneration atavism specifically manifested was in the pseudoscience known as physiognomy, which was very popular during the fin de siècle. The theory's basis is that a person's character is likely knowable from their body and facial features, suggesting that criminals can be identified by the way that they look, having features including large jaws, a forward projection of the jaw, low sloping forehead, high cheekbones, a flattened or upturned nose, and so on. The features that marked a quote-unquote good person were known as classical features, and conveniently matched the features conventional of white middle-class male Europeans. Also conveniently, large minority groups such as the working class, women, and people of colour more often bear these so-called physiognomic defects. According to this theory, they were therefore more likely to engage in criminal behaviour, and in an almost circular way of thinking, this also meant that the criminals always had a physiognomic defect somewhere. So applying this to the text, as I said earlier, is hugely influenced and uses scientific sort of frames as its narrative thing. It's a science experiment gone wrong in a lot of ways. Hyde's characterization seems to be directly influenced by these popular sciences, meaning that the text reflects these pseudoscientific ideas and their concurrent racism, classism, and misogyny. If we look at descriptions of Hyde's physique, we see Stevenson describe him as pale and dwarfish, with a displeasing smile, and speaking with a husky, whispering, and somewhat broken voice. Hyde's physique is marked with clumsy features that clearly identify him outside that white middle-class masculine man that comprises a quote-unquote good person, according to these popular scientific theories. Alongside this, Hyde's actions are described using language at once implicitly racist and degenerate. Evolution posits that humans evolved from apes, so Hyde acting with an ape-like fury is a direct indicator of him being an evolutionary throwback. It's dealing in the same language and images degeneration theories propose. In becoming Hyde, Jekyll has gone backward to an ape-like state. On his character as well, one of the propositions of degeneration theories is that the white middle-class European male is a pillar of goodness. After all, he has none of the atavistic traits criminals do, so Hyde's very evilness positions him as degenerate too. The fact that Edward Hyde, alone in the ranks of mankind, was pure evil, ties together these popular scientific ideas that criminality is physically displayed, and that his physical deformities lead him to being evil. When we compare these traits to Jekyll, the good personality to Hyde's evil, Jekyll looks like a good person, and he is good because of his looks. In his case, him being a large, well-made, smooth-faced man of 50 with something of a stylish cast perhaps, bearing every mark of capacity and kindness, should come as no surprise. Jekyll is a good person, and this is visible through his body shape and facial features. It's a product of physiognomy. He looks good, therefore he is good, and he is good, so he looks good. Likewise, Jekyll's character is impeccable, as quoted here. For 2 months I led a life of such severity as I had never before attained to, and enjoyed the compensation of an approving conscience. Jekyll's goodness has direct benefits to him, with his approving conscience implicitly leading to his good looks. So overall, this talk has hopefully outlined some of the relevant 19th century scientific context with which you can better understand Jekyll and Hyde. I've attempted to outline this contextual information by drawing attention to and explaining how the novel uses popular scientific thought of the late 19th century to characterize Jekyll and Hyde. I explained the theories of degeneration, atavism, and physiognomy, and how the text engages with those pools of thought. I then took you through some textual examples of how both of their physiques is intimately connected to their moral goodness and badness. I hope you have found this talk interesting and that it's developed your understanding of the text within the 19th century context it was produced in. Thank you for watching this workshop, listening to it and participating as well. If you are interested in learning more about what it's like to study English literature and/or creative writing at university, you can start with our website. Feel free to contact us with questions. The information is on this link here, and thank you for watching.